Without him, the initiated reforms, even when drastic, leave the old way of life unchanged, and any change in government usually amounts to no more than a transfer of power from one set of men of action to another. Without him, there can be perhaps no new beginning. When the old order begins to fall apart, many of the boisterous men of words who prayed so long for the day are in a funk. The first glimpse of the face of anarchy frightens them out of their wits. They forget all they said about the poor simple folk and run for help to strong men of action, princes, generals, administrators, bankers, landowners, who know how to deal with the rabble and how to stem the tide of chaos. Not so the fanatic. Chaos is his element. When the old order begins to crack, he wades in with all his might and recklessness to blow the whole heated present to a high heaven. He glories in the sight of the world coming to a sudden end. To hell with reforms! All that already exists is rubbish, and there is no sense in reforming rubbish. He justifies his will to anarchy with the plausible assertion that there can be no new beginning so long as the old clutters the landscape. He shoves aside the frightened men of words, if they are still around, through he continues to extol their doctrines and mouth their slogans. He alone knows the innermost cravings of the masses in action, the cravings for communion, for mustering of the host, for dissolution of cursed individuality in the majority, and the majesty and the grandeur of a mighty whole. Posterity is king, and woe to those inside the outside of the movement who hug and hang on to the present. 111. Whence come the fanatics? Mostly from the ranks of the non-creative men of words. The most significant division between men of words is between those who can find fulfillment in creative work and those who cannot. The creative man of words, no matter how bitterly he may criticize and deride the existing order, is actually attached to the present. His passion is to reform and not to destroy. When the mass movement remains wholly in his keeping, he turns it into a mild affair. The reforms he initiates are of the surface, and life flows on without a sudden break. But such a development is possible only when an anarchic auction of the masses does not come into play, either because the old order abdicates without a struggle, or because the man of words allies himself with strong men of action the moment chaos threatens to break loose. When the struggle with the old order is bitter and the chaotic victory can be won only by utmost unity and self-sacrifice, the creative man of words is usually shoved aside, and the management of affairs falls into the hands of the non-creative men of words, the eternal misfits and the fanatical contemners of the present. The man who wants to write a great book, paint a great picture, create an architectural masterpiece, become a great scientist, and knows that never in all eternity will he be able to realize this, his innermost desire, can find no peace in a stable social order, old or new. He sees his life as irrecoverably spoiled, and the world perpetually out of joint. He feels at home only in the state of chaos. Even when he submits to or impose an iron discipline, he is but submitting to or shaping an indispensable instrument for attaining a state of eternal flux, eternal becoming. Only when engaged in change does he have a sense of freedom and the feeling that he is growing and developing. It is because he can never be reconciled with himself that he feels finally in the fixed order of things. Marat, Robespierre, Lenin, Mussolini, and Hitler are outstanding examples of fanatics arising from the ranks of non-creative men of words. Peter Verrick points out most of the Nazi bigwigs had artistic and literary ambitions, which they could not realize. Hitler tried painting and architecture, Goebbels drama, the novel and poetry, Rosenberg architecture and philosophy, von Scherch poetry, funk music, Streicher painting. Almost all were failures, not only by the usual vulgar criterion of success, but by their own artistic criteria. Their artistic and literary ambitions were originally far deeper than political ambitions, and were integral parts of their personalities. The creative man of words is ill at ease in the atmosphere of an active movement. He feels that its whirl and passions sap his creative energies. So long as he is conscious of the creative flow within him, he will not find fulfillment in leading millions and in winning victories. The result is that once the movement starts rolling, he either retires voluntarily or is pushed aside. Moreover, since the genuine man of words can never wholeheartedly and for long suppress his critical faculty, he is inevitably cast in the role of the heretic. Thus, unless the creative man of words stifles the newborn movement by allying himself with the practical men of action, or unless he dies at the right moment, he is likely to end up either a shunned recluse or an exile or facing a firing squad. 112. The danger of the fanatic to the development of a movement is that he cannot settle down. Once victory has been won and the new order begins to crystallize, the fanatic becomes an element of strain and disruption. The taste for strong feelings drives him on to search for mysteries yet to be revealed and secret doors yet to be opened. He keeps groping for extremes. Just thus, on the morrow of victory, most mass movements find themselves in the grip of dissension. The door, which yesterday found an outlet in life and death struggle with external enemies, now vents itself in violent disrupts and clash of factions. Hatred has become a habit. With no more outside enemies to destroy, the fanatics make enemies of one another. Hitler, himself a fanatic, could diagnose with one precision the state of mind of the fanatics who plotted against him within the ranks of the National Socialist Party. In his order, to the newly appointed chief of the SA after the purge of Ronin in 1934, he speaks of those who will not settle down. Without realizing it, they have found in nihilism their ultimate confession of faith. Their unrest and disadequate can find satisfaction only in some conspiratorial activity of the mind, in perpetually plotting the disintegration of whatever the setup at the moment happens to be, end quote. As was then often the case with Hitler, his accusations against antagonists inside and outside the Reich were of self-revelation. He too, particularly in the last days, found in nihilism his ultimate philosophy and valediction. If allowed to have their way, the fanatics may split a movement into schism and heresies, which threaten its existence. Even when the fanatics do not breed dissension, they can still wreck the movement by driving it to attempt the impossible. Only the entrance of a political man of action can save the achievements of the movement. The practical men of action. 113. A movement is pioneered by men of words, materialized by fanatics, and consolidated by men of action. It is usually an advantage to a movement, and perhaps a prerequisite for its endurance, that these roles should be played by different men succeeding each other as the conditions require. When the same person or persons, or same type of person, leads a movement from its inception to maturity, it usually ends in disaster. The fascist and Nazi movements were without a successive change in leadership, and both ended in disaster. It was Hitler's fanaticism, his inability to settle down and play the role of a practical man of action, which brought ruin to his movement. Had Hitler died in the middle of the 1930s, there is little doubt that a man of action of the type of Göring would have succeeded to the leadership, and the movement would have survived. There is, of course, the possibility of a change in character. A man of words might change into a genuine fanatic or into a practical man of action. Yet the evidence points that such metamorphoses are usually temporary, and that sooner or later there is a reversion to the original type. Trotsky was essentially a man of words, vain, brilliant, and an individualist to the core. The cataclysmic collapse of an empire and Lenin's overpowering will brought him into the camp of the fanatics. In the Civil War he displayed unequaled talents as an organizer and general, but the moment the strain relaxed at the end of the Civil War he was a man of words again, without ruthlessness and dark suspicion, putting his trust in words rather than the relentless force, allowed himself to be pushed aside by the crafty fanatic Stalin. Stalin himself was a combination of fanatic and a man of action, with the fanatical tinge predominating. His disastrous blunders, the senseless liquidation of the kulaks and their offspring, the terror of the purges, the pact with Hitler, the clumsy meddling of the creative work of writers, artists, and scientists were the blunders of a fanatic. There was a small chance for the Russians to taste the joys of the present while Stalin the fanatic was in power. Hitler, too, was primarily a fanatic, and his fanaticism vitiated his remarkable achievement as a man of action. There are, of course, rare leaders such as Lincoln, Gandhi, even FDR, Churchill, and Nehru. They do not hesitate to harness a man's hungers and fears to weld a following and make it zealous unto death in the service of a holy cause. But unlike Hitler, Stalin, or even Luther and Calvin, they are not tempted to use the slime of frustrated souls as mortar in the building of a new world. The self-confidence of these rare leaders is derived from and blended with their faith in humanity, for they know that no one can be honorable unless he honors mankind. 114. The man of action saves the movement from the suicidal dissensions and the recklessness of the fanatics, but his appearance usually marks the end of the dynamic phase of the movement. The war with the present is over. The genuine man of action is intent not on renovating the world, but on possessing it. Whereas the life breath of the dynamic phase was protest and desire for a drastic change, the final phase is chiefly preoccupied with administering and perpetuating the power won. With the appearance of a man of action, the explosive vigor of the movement is embalmed and sealed in sanctified institutions. A religious movement crystallizes in a hierarchy and a ritual. A revolutionary movement in organs of vigilance and administration. A nationalist movement in governmental and patriotic institutions. The establishment of a church marks the end of the revivalist spirit. The organs of a triumphant revolution liquidates the revolutionary mentality and technique. The governmental institutions of a new or revived nation put an end to chauvinistic belligerence. The institutions freeze a pattern of united action. The members of the institutionalized collective body are expected to act as one man, yet they must represent a loose aggregation rather than a spontaneous coalescence. They must be unified only through their unquestioning loyalty to the institutions. Spontaneity is suspect, and duty is prized above devotion. 115. The chief preoccupation of a man of action when he takes over an arrived movement is to fix and perpetuate its unity and readiness for self-sacrifice. His ideal is a compact, invincible whole that functions automatically. To achieve this, he cannot rely on enthusiasm, for enthusiasm is ephemeral. Persuasion, too, is unpredictable. He inclines, therefore, to rely mainly on drill and coercion. He finds the assertion that all men are cowards less debatable than that all men are fools, and in the words of Sir John Maynard, inclines to found new order on the necks of the people rather than on their hearts. To genuine man of action is not a man of faith, but a man of law. Still, he cannot help being awed by the tremendous achievements of faith and spontaneity in the early days of the movement, when a mighty instrument of power was conjured out of the void. The memory of it is still extremely vivid. He takes therefore great care to preserve in the new institutions an oppressive facade of faith, and maintains an incessant flow of fervent propaganda. Through he relies mainly on the persuasiveness of force. His orders are worded in pious vocabulary, and the old formulas and slogans are continually on his lips. The symbols of faith are carried high and given reverence. The men of words and the fanatics of the early period are canonized. Through the steel fingers of coercion make themselves felt everywhere, and great emphasis is placed on mechanical drill. The pious phrases and the fervent propaganda give to coercion a semblance of persuasion, and to habit a semblance of spontaneity. No effort is spared to present the new order as the glorious consummation of the hopes and struggles of the early days. The man of action is eclectic in the methods he uses to endow the new order with stability and performance. He borrows from near and far, from friend and foe. He even goes back to the old order, which preceded the movement, and appropriates it for many techniques of stability, thus unintentionally establishing continuity with the past. The institution of an absolute dictator, which is characteristic of this stage, is as much a deliberate employment of a device as the manifestation of sheer hunger for power. Byzantinism is likely to be conspicuous both at birth and at decline of an organization. It is the expression of a desire for a stable pattern, and it can be used either to give shape to as yet amphibious, or to hold together at what much seems to be falling apart. The infallibility of the Bishop of Rome was propounded by Irenaeus, 2nd century, in the earliest day of the papacy, and by Pius in 1870, when the papacy seemed to be on the brink of extinction. Thus the order evolved by a man of action is patchwork. Stalin's Russia was a patchwork of Bolshevism, Tsarism, nationalism, pan-Salvism, dictatorship, and borrowings from Hitler, and monopolistic capitalism. Hitler's Third Reich was a conglomerate of nationalism, racialism, persuasionism, dictatorship, and borrowing from fascism, Bolshevism, Shintoism, Catholicism, and the ancient Hebrews. Christianity, too, when after the conflicts and dissension of the first few centuries crystallized into an authoritarian church, was a patchwork of old and new and borrowings from friend and foe. It patterned its hierarchy after the bureaucracy of the Roman Empire, adopted portions of the antique ritual developed in the institution of an absolute leader, and used every means to absorb all existing elements of life and power. 116. In the hands of a man of action, the mass movement ceases to be a refuge from the agonies and burdens of an individual. 116. In the hands of a man of action, the mass movement ceases to be a refuge from the agonies and burdens of an individual existence, and becomes the means of self-realization for the ambitious. The irresistible attraction which the movement now exerts on those preoccupied with the individual careers is a clear-cut indication of a drastic change in its character and of its reconciliation with the present. It is also clear that the influx of these career men accelerates the transformation of the movement into an enterprise. Hitler, who had a clear vision for the whole course of a movement even while he was nursing his infant, National Socialism, warned that the movement retains its vigor only so long as it can offer nothing in the present, only honor and fame in the eyes of posterity, and that when it is invaded by those who want to make the most of the present, the mission of such a movement is done for. The movement, at this stage, still concerns itself with the frustrated, not to harness their discontent in a deadly struggle with the present, but to reconcile them with it, to make them patient and meek. To them it offers the distant hope, the dream, and the vision. Thus, at the end of its vigorous span, the movement is an instrument of power for the successful and an opiate for the frustrated. Good and bad mass movements. The unattractiveness and sterility of the active phase. 117. This concerns itself chiefly with the active phase of mass movements, the phase molded and dominated by the true believer. It is in this phase that mass movements of all types often manifest the common traits we have tried to outline. Now it seems to be true that no matter how noble the original purpose of a movement, and however beneficent the end result, its active phase is bound to strike us as unpleasant, if not evil.